Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and, let's be honest, a deeply controversial part of India's constitution, its emergency powers. The big question is, are they a necessary shield to protect the nation when things get tough, or can they become a sword that's turned against its own people? Let's get into it.
So let me just start with this question. Can a democracy actually turn itself off? Can a system that's built on freedom and individual rights just decide to pause all of that? And look, this isn't just some abstract thought experiment. In India, this question has a very real and a very dramatic history.
Because back in 1975, that question was answered with a resounding yes. Over 100,000 people, we're talking political opponents, journalists, activists, even just ordinary citizens, were thrown in jail without a trial when the government declared a national emergency. This one event really shows you the incredible power we're about to unpack. All right, so to really get a handle on these powers, we have to start with their most infamous use. This was a period that honestly tested the very foundations of Indian democracy. So how on earth did this happen? Well, in 1975, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's election from 4 years earlier was actually invalidated by a court. They found her guilty of electoral misconduct. Now, facing massive protests and calls for her to resign, her government went to the president and advised him to declare a national emergency, claiming there were threats of internal disturbance. That emergency lasted for 21 long months. And the effect on the country? It was immediate, and it was brutal. Fundamental rights, gone. The press was heavily censored. You could only print what the government approved. Elections were just canceled. Dissent was completely crushed. The government even pushed this horrific forced sterilization campaign. It was a total shutdown of democratic life as people knew it. Now, here's the really crucial point. This wasn't some kind of illegal coup. The powers that were used in 1975 were written directly into the Constitution itself. So let's take a look inside the constitutional toolbox that made it all possible. Okay, so these powers are found in Part 18 of the Constitution. And get this, they were partly inspired by Germany's Weimar Constitution. The one that came right before things went very, very wrong. That historical precedent alone, as you can imagine, made the framers of India's constitution extremely nervous. The whole idea was to let the central government take complete control in a crisis, basically turning the country from a federal system of shared power into a unitary one overnight. And what's so telling is how the framers hoped these powers would be treated. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, one of the key architects of the Constitution, said he hoped they would remain dead letters. Basically, powers so extreme, so dangerous, that they would just sit on the page and almost never ever be used. As we're about to see, reality turned out to be, well, quite different. So, this constitutional toolbox basically contains 3 different kinds of emergency powers. First, you have the big one, the national emergency under Article 352. This is for huge crises like a war or an armed rebellion. Then there's the really controversial one, President's Rule under Article 356, which lets a central government take over a state government. And finally, there's a financial emergency under Article 360 for a total economic meltdown, a power so drastic it's never once been used. Now, of those 3, one has been used far, far more than the others. And often, it wasn't used as a shield to protect the country, but as a political weapon by the party in power at the center. Just look at that number for a second. 111. That's how many times President's Rule has been used to dismiss a democratically elected state government since 1950. This is hardly the dead letter that the framers had hoped for, right? And hey, this isn't just a hunch. There's actual data to back this up. A major commission, the Sarkaria Commission, investigated this very issue. They looked at 75 cases of President's Rule, and their findings were just stark. In 52 of those cases, that's nearly 70%, they concluded the power was misused for purely political reasons. A pretty clear pattern started to emerge. President's Rule was almost always used against states run by opposition parties. The official trigger was often a report from the state's governor, who, by the way, is appointed by the central government. You can see the clear conflict of interest there. Some states, like Kerala, Punjab, and Uttar Pradesh, have had this happen to them 10 times each. But you know what? The story doesn't just end with misuse. The shock of the 1975 emergency and this constant abuse of President's Rule triggered a really powerful response. The system itself began to build guardrails to protect itself from its own worst impulses. The very first guardrail came from the political system.
After the emergency finally ended and a new government was elected, Parliament acted fast to make sure something like that could never, ever happen in the same way again.
This was the 44th Amendment in 1978, and it was a total game changer. So before, all it took was the Prime Minister's advice to declare an emergency. After, you needed written advice from the entire cabinet. Before, the vague reason of internal disturbance was enough. After, the bar was raised much higher to armed rebellion. And maybe most important of all, it made the right to life, under Articles 20 and 21, non-suspendable, no matter what. The second crucial guardrail didn't come from Parliament, it came from the judiciary. The Supreme Court stepped in to put a serious check on the out-of-control misuse of president's rule.
This all came down to a landmark case in 1994, known as S.R. Bomai. The court laid down some crystal-clear rules. First, they said imposing president's rule isn't above the law. Courts can review it. Second, it has to be an absolute last resort, not a first option. And third, you can't just dissolve a state assembly right away. You have to wait for Parliament to approve the proclamation first. This stopped governments from making irreversible political moves. So, with these new guardrails in place, you might be thinking, okay, problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. This tension, this constant tug-of-war between the need for national security and the protection of individual liberty, it remains a central challenge in India even today. Because despite all the reforms, key issues are still there. That role of the governor as a central appointee, still a major point of friction. And there are still big questions about when these powers are used and when they're not. For example, many questioned why president's rule wasn't imposed during the severe breakdown of law and order in Manipur, which led to accusations that it was a political calculation. All of this puts constant pressure on the delicate balance of power between the center and the states. Ultimately, it all boils down to this one core idea. These extraordinary powers were put in the Constitution to save democracy in a crisis, not to become a threat to democracy. The entire constitutional and political struggle over the decades has been about trying to hold them to that original purpose. And that leaves us with the final and most vital question. Through constitutional amendments, through landmark court rulings, and through public vigilance, India has tried to find an answer. But ensuring that a shield designed for the nation never, ever becomes a sword used against its own people, well, that's a challenge that every single generation has to confront all over again.